Yeah, so today I will show you some of the results from my PhD that I acquired. So as Attila Chinal said in Holloway, and so here you can see my email address on this slide. If you have any question, we don't have time to answer anything you want to discuss with me, or if you want a copy of the paper that has been written on this project, I will show you after the list of the paper. I will be happy to share that with you. So please don't hesitate to contact me if you need anything. There you go. So my PhD project was included into a slightly larger project that was looking at Mesozoic lacustrine carbonate. And it was more a project looking at multi-scale analysis of one member. So I will show you after the stratigraphy of the Purbeck Limestone Group of the Wessex Basin. So it was an integrated project on non-marine microbial carbonate that I've done between 2012 and 2017. The project was funded by BP and Baker Hughes and was done in Royal Holloway, University of London. So in this project, there were two PhDs, myself looking at outcrop models, and Stanislaw Kozlowski, so it's him in the middle. I don't know if you can see my, him in the middle there. That was more looking at numerical models, so including what we are doing in the outcrop with numerical modeling. And then the supervision was done by Professor Dan Bozens and Peter Burgess, that now moved to the University of Liverpool. And our contact in Baker Hughes was Bernie Vining, and in BP, Ian Billing, but Ian Billing sadly left us a few months ago. But it was a very good contact we have in the project. So this project was looking at the importance to integrate outcrop analog, where we looked at ancient analog with the Purbeck. We also went to visit some modern analogs that I will show you in more detail, some images, nice images of Mexico. There's a freshwater lake in Mexico called Laguna Bacalar. And we integrated that into forward numerical modeling. So two scales, one at a larger scale looking at the facies distribution within the one part of the basin with the influence of tectonic on the facies. That was directly linked to the subsurface analysis that I will show you in a few minutes. And another model that was done at a very smaller scale, looking at the microbial mounts that we found in the Purbeck and the influence, the control that all the external factors can have on the microbial growth and the microbial morphologies. So unfortunately, I won't have time to show you too much in detail or to show you the models today. But if you want, I can explain to you that later, or maybe in the questions I can go a bit further on that. So as I said, here is a list of publications that has been published so far on this project. As Professor Chinar said, I'm now independent, working from Konya working on this paper, trying to achieve to publish the most I can from this project. And I referenced around the presentation all the papers where I took the maps or the stratigraphy of all the images from the papers. But if you want a copy of them, please do not hesitate to ask me. And just to note that we submitted the paper that talking about the method about 2 weeks ago to Terra Nova. So we are waiting to know if going to be accepted or not. So if I now go into the topic of the presentation today, the late Jurassic lacustrine microbial carbonate of the Purbeck Group of the Wessex Basin. So that's an image that I was in the flyer. That's a very famous area in the southern coast of UK. It's called Lulworth Cove, which is a very circular bay. And that place here is called Sterhole. So that is exposed on the Jurassic coast. That is a World Heritage Site and is a very good destination for British holidaymaker and geologists as well. So I just wanted to use this image to introduce you the large-scale stratigraphy So we don't see much of the Portland group, but at the base here, you will see an image after where we see a bit better. We have the Portland group, which is upper Jurassic in age and made of limestone, shallow marine limestones. And then we have the Purbeck Limestone Group here that formed all these very bedded formations. That is upper Jurassic to lower Cretaceous, and that are lacustrine limestone to clay stones. So that will be the focus on this on the presentation today. On top of it, we found the Weldon Formation, that is lower Cretaceous in age, continental sandstone and conglomerate, the Green Sand Formation, also lower Cretaceous in Albion, continental sandstone mainly, and then the famous chalk that are upper Cretaceous and that are exposed on the most of the southern coast of UK. And now I want to focus on this terror here, on this area, to introduce you the stratigraphy that I'm going to use for the Purbeck Limestone Group. So here you see a slightly different angle on the image. Here you see a bit more the Portland and the boundary between the Portland and the Purbeck. You will see a bit better later as well, but you can already see the difference between the Portland that are more massive bed rather than in the Purbeck, we have more bedded unit. And then within the Purbeck Limestone Group, we can, it was defined two formations. The Lulworth Formation, that is considered as more brackish water condition in a lacustrine setting, and the Dorset Formation, considered as saline to hypersaline lacustrine condition. And the boundary between them is a marker bed that we found in the area that is called the cinder bed, and is basically a coquina made of tiny oysters. And that's a bed that can also be traced in some areas in Northern Europe, and that has been considered for many years as the boundary between the Jurassic and the Cretaceous in the Purbeck. But more recent data, especially magnetostratigraphy data, are showing that the actual Jurassic Cretaceous boundary may be in these beds, so in the bed that we studied in this project, in the Lulworth Formation. But unfortunately, because there is very little macrofauna, you will see later that it's only ostracods or gastropods that we can find in the area. It's very difficult to date properly. So the mystery remain unsolved. But if we carry on with the stratigraphy on the lower part of the Purbeck, and so on this Lulworth Formation, then we can identify. It was defined the shallow brackish lake of the mute member, which is what was the topic of my PhD and what I'm going to show you in more detail after. Then we have the Ridgeway member, and then the Warbarrow-Tout member that was a bit more brackish, deep brackish lake. You can see the difference here that are more limestone bed, rather than here we have some. We start to have some shales or marls interbedded with a full carbonate, full limestone. And just as a very fine to finish the introduction, you can already see some rounded structure here on the top of this surface or here. So that are these microbial mounds made of thrombolite texture that I'm going to detail to you in the rest of the presentation. So in this presentation today, I will show you the geological background, some subsurface analysis and the conclusion we have out of it, the fasces we defined. Then I will show you the microbial mounds, what they look like and how we think they formed. And then I will show you the fascist model we've done from this for this microbial lacustrine carbonate. Two modern analogues. I will show you, I mentioned the Laguna Bacalar in Mexico, but I will also show you the Great Salt Lake and the similarities with the Purbeck. And then I will show you the tectonostratigraphic model we've done on the area that summarizes basically my PhD project. So a very brief discussion and then the main conclusion on the microbial mounds. So if we begin directly onto the subject. So I mentioned that we are in the Wessex Basin. You can see the outline here in orange of the Wessex Basin, located between France and UK. half being onshore and half being in the Channel Basin. And if we look on this white square here, zoom in, we can see that in the area that where we focus, where the Purbeck is the best exposed, there are two main faults. The Ridgeway fault on the western part and the Purbeck White fault, or also called the Purbeck fault, and that these faults are separated by a area in the middle. And we can see that in this area we studied, so on the northwest part of the Wessex Basin, the deposition is mainly Upper Jurassic and Cretaceous. So now I will show you a geological map on this red square here. So here it is. So in this map, we can see the Ridgeway fault trace as well as the Purbeck fault. The traces were out of the seismic interpretation that I've done for this project. In the next slide, you will see more detail of that. What to note here is that there are a series of anticline, the Weymouth, Lulworth Bank, and the Purbeck anticline. The Purbeck Limestone Group here is highlighted in this orange, dark orange. And you can also see very high detailed stratigraphy on Weymouth Bay. So that's onshore. Here you can see the coastline, and that's offshore. So that's because there is a multi-beam echo standard data that has been shot a few years ago in the bay, not by us, by a biology association in the area. And why do we see so much of the stratigraphy? Is because there is a very high tide range in the area. So there is no possibility, luckily for us geologists, to have any sediments deposited and remaining in place. So basically, what we see here is the stratigraphy on the seafloor. In terms of the lithostratigraphy and the basin evolution, the Purbeck group was deposited into the late stage of the semi setting of the Wessex Basin that spread from the Permian to the mid-Cretaceous. Then we have a post-rift setting in the late Cretaceous, and finally an alpine inversion in the Cenozoic. And to show you a bit more in detail, here is a seismic line that interpreted during this project, located in Bournemouth Bay, here on the east. You can see the red line on the right of the map. And so we can see the Cenozoic setting, especially with the lower Jurassic thickness much greater in the hanging wall block of the Purbeck fault than in the footwall. The post-rift setting, especially in the north of the fault, where we have this erosion prior the deposition of the green sand and gold down to the Purbeck, to the Portland group. And finally, the alpine inversion with the reactivation of the fault into reverse fault and the creation of this series of anticline. So in that case, it will be the Purbeck anticline in this seismic line. But that's just one seismic line, but I have interpreted in total 57 that were 2D lines. So you can see here on this time thickness map for the top for the Purbeck interval, the dashed line are the seismic line traces interpreted. There was one 3D block here, the square on the Bournemouth Bay, and we had access to 26 wells, equally reported, distributed onshore and offshore. And so here I show you a time thickness map. Unfortunately, we didn't have during the project the time conversion rate, time thickness conversion rate. So time depth conversion rate. So we couldn't have the actual thickness of the Purbeck from the seismic profiles. But the time interval can give us some ideas on the evolution. And what we can see is that it seems that there is an overall thickness increase towards the east. So we know from the literature that the basinward direction, and you saw from the image from the location of the Wessex Basin, that the center of the basin will be more to the east. So that could fit. But because of the resolution of the seismic, only 2D and they are very old, we couldn't have, it was not that precise. So just some well correlation we've done to try to understand that. Something else we can see from this map is that the Purbeck Limestone Group appeared to be thicker on the hanging wall blocks. So obviously, north of the fault, we had no preservation, or the Purbeck was not deposited. So we cannot know, but when we look at the south of the fault, when we are close to the fault, it appears to be thicker than if we go further south and away from the fault. And it appears that there are three main depot centers. One that is very close to the ridgeway fault. That I will ask you to remember the location of this one for the end of the presentation. I will remind you anyway. There is another one very close to the Purbeck fault, and then another depot center further south that may be linked to a graben system. That's something that we don't know exactly what it is, based on the seismic only, and we don't have. You can see there is no wells cross-cutting that, so it was purely interpretative. So to try to understand the thickness variation of the entire Purbeck Limestone Group, we've done some well correlation, looking from north to south. You can see here on the map on the top right, location of the wells, and then to the east. If to look at the thickness variation, I flattened that to the top of Purbeck interval, and we can identify in these wells three main units that are very well documented shore, an anhydrite unit at the base, a limestone and a claystone unit. And then if we replace the location of the fault, so there is one fault here between the 11.3 and 11.1 well, and the Purbeck fault between the 11.1 and 11.2 wells. Looking at the actual thickness in that case of the Purbeck Limestone Group, we can have some ideas of the thickness variation. And one of the first things we can see is that it was not that clear on the seismic lines, because most of the time the entire Purbeck group is below the seismic resolution. But with the well, we have a better idea. And with these wells, we indeed have indication that the Purbeck group is thicker in the hanging wall blocks of the fault. Every time we go into an hanging wall block, we increase the thickness drastically. And then that was the main argument for us to give us an idea that the ridgeway and the Purbeck fault were active during the deposition of the Purbeck, at least active through pulses. Maybe not active constantly, but there were some activity and then some rest. So yeah, that's it. So that's something that has been published recently. That's all these things, these large-scale models, have been published this summer onto a publication. So now I wanted to show you as well, if we focus now on the lower part of the Purbeck, on the microbial area, I wanted to show you all the field work that we've done. So in total, there are 22 sedimentary logs that you can see all the white squares here spread across the area. Basically, in the UK, it's not that easy to access a crop. It's just where they are. There is no hill, so basically when there is a quarry or a disused quarry or a cliff. And we collected more than 300 samples across all these locations. And I wanted to show you what the outcrops look like, just as an introduction. So here is a Portian quarry outcrop located in the western part of the area. And you can see, as I showed you a bit earlier, the boundary between the Portland and the Purbeck. The Portland more massive bed compared to the Purbeck more bedded unit. And in that particular case, the lower part of the Purbeck, you can see already that is more regular beds. There is not much microbial mounds in this area, and this new member is much thinner in this area. But the best area to look at the microbial mound were on the Isle of Portland. So you can see here an image of the island. And you can already see here from this image that the western coast is much more cliffy, so it will be much more difficult to access than on the eastern coast, which is a slightly more gentle slope. And in fact, if we look at an image, so that image was taken from more or less from here, looking towards the south. It's very big cliffs and very difficult to access. You can see where the boundary between the Portland and the Purbeck is in that particular case, but here it's on top of the cliffs. So I'm not a good climber, so it was basically impossible to access that. Only accessible through quarries in the area. So in this particular island, there are a lot of quarries because they are using the Portland stone for buildings, and that's, maybe you know that that's very famous, that they use this Portland stone from the Portland to make Buckingham Palace in London. But if we go onto the eastern coast of the island, that's where we start to have much better outcrop. And you can see, for example, this outcrop we call Godno, which is a disused quarry where we can access and touch everything easily. The boundary between the Portland and the Purbeck Limestone Group. And then you can already see, I will show you way more detail, already see some of these microbial mounds here that I'm talking about. So this outcrop, you will see it coming back quite often in the presentation. That's our favorite outcrop because it's very easy to access and it's where we see most of the things and the best example of the microbial mounds. Another type of outcrop we can find is an active quarry. Just before it was a disused quarry, this is a very active. You can see that it's very active. And this landscape changes constantly. If you go now, all this area here is filled, and here there is a big hole in this part here. So it's constantly changing. But we can also see here the boundary between the Portland here and the Purbeck. And with the new member being just located in this section here. Now I will show you a last outcrop that it will be a bit more to the east and the fossil forest outcrop. So that's another type of outcrop we have. So we are in the coastal area. Here you have Dan bosons for the scale, and you can see the boundary between the Portland and the Purbeck. A bit more risky to access, and you can see that you have to wait to be at a very low tide condition and in a non-stormy weather. Otherwise, you can be wiped away quite easily. So, and you can already see here also some of these microbial mounds I will detail to you. This bumpy structure here, very well exposed as well in this area. So I will now show you. We will go into detail of the mounds. So the result of all this field work was the creation of sedimentary log, and here I present you a generalized sedimentary log. So it's summarizing the best cases for every bed, and I will detail to you the names I'm going to use in the rest of the presentation. So we have the boundary between the Portland and the Purbeck that is an unconformity, that is discordant, and we will have a sublittoral lacustrine facies association that we define. That is basically a more slightly deeper, fine grain facies. I will show you the facies just after. Then we have 3 paleosoils that were defined by an emergent facies association called the basal, lower, and great dirt bed. These names are local names that were given by quarry names, but they are the one that has been defined in literature for these beds. And then we have this scroll, hard, and soft cap, which are the beds where we found the microbial mounds, thrombolytic mounds. So you can see already from the drawing there that we will have different shapes of mounds. So I will detail to you that in a few minutes. And we also have 2 different facies association here: a shallow mounded structure, which will be mounded structure, literally, and a deep mounded marginal lacustrine that will be more microbial mats that will cover the bottom of the lake. And then on top of that, we will find an hypersaline lacustrine, which is basically evaporite, so recrystallized evaporite, and then potentially a tectonic breccia. Tectonic and evaporite breccia, and then on top of that, a bedded marginal lacustrine facies association defined by this cypress freestone bed. For the rest of the talk, I will focus only on this bed here in the red square. I will not have time to detail much about the rest. But to show you already, I mentioned a few times these microbial mounds, what they look like. So here you can see an image on the Isle of Portland, on the eastern coast. So here we look at the hard cap bed. So this the thick bed we found in the area. We have this sandwich between 2 paleosoils. In that case, it will be the lower and the great dirt bed. And then we can see these microbial mounds, very complex in shape, can be 4 to 5 meters tall. And we will have particular texture inside. You can see a hole here, a mold. This is something I will detail as well later, but it's very unique thing that these mounds develop around tree trunks and branches that can be in situ or laying down on the lake floor. Most of the time we found mold, but sometimes, very rarely nowadays, we can find the trees and the branches still in situ and silicified, where all the structure of the wood is very well preserved. And then in between the mounds, we will have this intermound peloidal packstone grainstone fasces that will, most of the time, you can see here, overlapping on the side of the mound. So you can see here in cross section that the mounds look very complex in shape. But if we look at them on a plan view, and here is a view of Lulworth Cove, the first image I showed you in the presentation, you can see that the mounds, they look more rounded, so much simpler shape when they are seen from the top. So these mounds here, they can be up to 20 meters in diameters. From all these sedimentary rocks, I defined 10 main fasces, with some of them containing some subfasces. A microbial fasces containing trombolite fasces, which will be the main mound builder. The stromatolite fasces that we will find more on the bottom of the bed, the base on the lake floor, and then a very unique fascia that again we never found anywhere else. A burrowed peloidal packstone that will form around the trees, and we will see some burrows. I will show you the detailed image on the next slide. Then we have this intraclastic peloidal packstone grainstone, which is this Intermount fasces, laminated most of the time packstone grainstone. The conglomerate and the carbonaceous marls that are basically the definition of the paleosoil, the two different paleosoil we have. And then the waxstone to fine grainstone, which is this sublittoral lacustrine fasces association, thought to be deposited much deeper into the lake, not being that deep though. And then we will have this gypsiferous peloidal packstone, calcareous sandstone, cross-bedded peloidal packstone grainstone. These three fasces are found only in the bed above what we are going to today, in the cypress freestone. And then this evaporite fasces with a vuggy, the crystallized in situ evaporite pseudomorph, and then an evaporated breccia. But for the rest of the talk, I will only focus on these fasces here. So in terms of the microbial mounds and the fasces that the mounds are made of, here is an image. So I told you it's our favorite outcrop from Godnor. It was on the top of the outcrop. You can see here this mold of the tree mold, and you can guess here some structure that we still have sometimes preserved the bark imprint into this mold. And then you can see that it's not very easy to see the boundary. It looks like it's here, but it can be here between the microbial mounds structure, which is a bit more vuggy, more porous than the intermound. So if I highlighted for you the boundary, and you really have to be on the outcrops to see that. It's very difficult to see that on an image, as you can see now, and to be able to see this boundary. But then within the mound, there is around the tree mold now, but the tree branches, we have this burrowed bandstone, peloidal bandstone that form a collar, a very regular collar around the tree. And then on top of it, we have this trombolite texture that will develop. You can see that it's much thinner in the bottom than it is at the base, that will develop upward and outward. But if we look in detail, I will show you now some images of these fasces to have. So here is a detail on the burrowed bandstone, and you can see the sinuous cavity of these burrows that is randomly distributed. Here is a thin section scan. You can see that there is no preferential orientation. When we look at them on thin section, sometimes they will be micritically lined, like here or in this image here, or sometimes they will be peloidally lined with peloids. So it's really, we don't know what form exactly these fasces. We think they are either larvae of worms, but we really don't know. We never found any modern analog or even ancient analog of this type of fasces developing around the tree, around the wood remain in a lacustrine setting. So now if we look at the thrombolite fasces, here is a hand specimen or hand field scale view. You can see that these thrombolite are made of columns, that these columns are made of clots or lumps, that is in a zoom in on the right hand side, and that these clots on the external part, they can be filled, the space between the columns can be filled with these Intermount fasces, or sometimes cannot, like we see on the image on the right, or even on the original image here. You can see that all these valves are still open. And in very rare case, actually only one location that I found on the area, we have these clots that are either replaced or coated with a silica cement. That's very unique condition. And if we look at the thrombolite fasces on the microscope, we can find a very beautiful textbook example of the microbial filament of the thrombolite system, the thrombolite texture. Or we can find on the external part of this clot, microclots that are laminated again on the external part. Here you have the boundary between the mounds and the intermounts. And sometimes you can also find within this diffuse microbial texture some macrofauna. So, for example, a gastropod incorporated, so trapped into the microbial texture. So, bearing in mind that the only macrofauna we found in this bed are ostracods and gastropods. So, in terms of micro description, it was a bit boring in that case to define. But when we look at the microbial filament, that was very exciting. So now that we see the organization of the how the mounds are formed and the fasces that form the mound, I will show you the morphologies of the mound that we found. And for that, we've done some LiDAR surveys. So 7 in total across the Isle of Portland. Here you can see the location of these surveys. That we selected the disused quarry and active quarries to do that. And here I show you a video. I hope you can see it, of again our favorite outcrop. But you can see the image here that was taken from there with very highly detailed imaging. Here you can see the point cloud that is. I tried to go down to show the resolution that is about 1 millimeter when we are at the best location. In high resolution surveys, and from that, I will show you after what we've done with this data. We measure the height, width, area, and perimeter to characterize the mound, the shapes. So here you can see that's just one survey. So all this part of the coast here that we've done on the eastern side, and we have 7 of them like that. So to show you what we've done, so after the LiDAR surveys, we went back in the field. So here you can see me on the top of the ladder, mapping the contact between the mounds and the intermount fasces. So here you can see the chalk line. So I was mapping that, and then a colleague was numerizing that automatically directly onto an iPad and taking pictures of all these things. Back in the office, we used this mapping to create polylines on a software called Rescan. And then we could have at home basically a representation of the field and with the location of the mound in 3D. And from that, we could measure the visible height that we could see. The mound could have been bigger than that, but that's the only thing we have preserved. The visible width. And we computed as well the perimeters of basically the length of the polyline and the areas of the mounds. And with that, we've done some characterization of the shape. So what I'm showing that to you now is the paper I'm preparing at the moment that I hope will be out, maybe not out, but submitted by the end of the year. So here, to show you what the result we get from that is another quarry. That case is Coomfield Quarry, very close to Godnor. Godnor is there. Where again we looked at 2 beds in the Isle of Portland. The main reason being that The third bed where we find microbial mounds in the Isle of Portland is not as developed or is most of the time hidden by vegetation. So we mainly looked at the school and the art camp. And you can already see here on this image with the traces of the mound that there is two different shapes. In the school cap bed, we will have much thinner mounds and that are more widespread, so tabular shape. While in the art cap, we will have a very more complex shape. So we can have isolated mounds that are a bit more rounded or way more complex mound that's type of shape that is very difficult to characterize. But you have to bear in mind that we only have a 2D section, 2D IDs of what the mounds look like, and that what we characterize as two mounds potentially is actually just one big mound coalesced, and that this basically three mounds here would be just one massive mound. But from that, we measured, so as I said, the height and the width, and we plotted that against each other to create this graph is all the data we have from all the mounds, from all the LiDAR surveys. And what we can see from that is that for smaller shape, we have a very good correlation, more or less 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. So we could identify that we have like a more bent shape, more rounded shape for smaller mounds. And when we go into bigger mounds, the point clouds become much more scattered, indicating what we see in the field, much more complex shape. But then we also measured and plotted the perimeter and the root square of the area. This type of a comparison is something that is commonly done for characterization of morphologies. And as an idea, I plotted here the perfect circular shape, which is a circle, in green. And what we can see here is that for small mounds, we will be much closer to the proper perfect circle shape. And when we go into big mounds, we will go further and further away from the perfect circle shape, and we have this very more complex mound. So out of that, we could define that the small mounds have a much simpler shape, can be rounded or a bun shape, and for big mounds they are much more complex, and we couldn't give a name on the type of shape because it's very random. Now that we see what the mounds look like and the difference in the shape, the small versus the big, I will show you how we think the sequence of event of the formation of these mounds was. And here, so we start with we are on the lake shore, on the shore of the lake, sorry, with the growth of these ancient conifer trees, the Protocotynoxylon. So they have been identified, as I told you, as I mentioned, because they were silicified in some cases, and with all the cells very well preserved. And that was not done by us; it was done by Jane Francis during her PhD, and she could identify and define what type of trees we had on this lake shore. But anyway, so what we think is that there was a first lake level rise, inundating the shore and killing the trees. The lake level was keeping rising, and the trees were starting to decay. And after that, at the same time, we had this formation of the burrowed limestone. That is, I told you, it was forming a collar, a regular collar around the trees. And that's why we think that was done during while the trees were still in living position. In the same time, we will have some silica input that will start to silicified only the wood, and then some stromatolites that will potentially start to develop on the bottom of the lake, maybe on some hard substrate. And we can say all these things because we have examples on the field that tell us that. So we have, for example, that's on the eastern side of on the western coast of the Isle of Portland, a tree mold. Here you can see that is still in living position, and you can see here silicified the roots of the tree still in situ and inside the paleosoil, which in that case will be the lower dot bed. And above, around this tree mold, we have this burrowed limestone structure that is all around the tree, and the thickness doesn't vary much. We also can say that because when we look at some of these burrows within these fascias, we have, so that's the current way up of the sample. We found geopetal sediment that are 90 degrees with the current horizontal, giving us the example that when that geopetal sediment formed, the tree were in living position. After that, and most likely because of the weight of this basically rock around the trees, the wood remain. The tree break off and break from their stems, but not that far that we find sometimes some of the silicified tree stem still in situ, as I showed you earlier. And then on top of that, we will have the formation and the growth of this thrombolite texture outward and upward, as I showed you earlier. And after that, the deposition of the intraclastic peloidal, so this intermount fascies. And we can also say that with example from the field. So here you see on the blue square here representing the tree stems in situ again. This tree mold in the middle, the burrowed limestone that goes around, and then on top of that, the trombolite forming upward and outward. Also, we can find this sort of things. Here a cross section where we find the stromatolite at the top of the bed. Here is a paleosoil just below. Some of the intermount that will come because you have to think in 3D. Sometimes there can be some intercalation of sediments. And then the trombolite that will grow after this burrowed limestone and mainly upward and towards basically where they can find light and nutrients. And if we look, we can say that as well, that they grow like that because we also find in some of the burrows another type of geopetal sediment that is consistent with the modern day horizontal. So showing us that developed as well when they were in a horizontal position. So after the tree fell. Once we've seen all the sequence of events, now we show you what we think are the controls on this, especially this flat-topped morphology. So we start with the substrate. It could be hard. We think that it must have been a hard substrate. That's something we think from the literature. We know from microbial mounts we can find in the worldwide. And then the tree started, the microbial mounts started to grow at the same rate, more or less, as the sediment input. So here you can see in green the intermount fascias. But at some point, the mound will overgrow the sedimentation rate and will colonize the top of the sediment and will form this sort of wings and flat topped, because at some point we think that the water level was not rising, so it was more or less stable, and the mound were growing until they reached the maximum they could reach until the top of the water. So that's something we can see. We can say because we found this particular thing in the field. For example, here with the intermount. Here in that case, it would grow on top of the intermount fascias potentially, not on top of the soil, paleosoil. And then it will go outward and upward. Then we will have some sediment input potentially that will most likely kill or slow down the microbial growth, but not completely kill the microbial community. And that was associated as well, we think, by either a lake level rise or a subsidence increase. And then the mounds will restart to grow from that in this exact same process at the same pace at the start with the sedimentation, and then overgrowing the sedimentation rate and creating another wing. So that's why we will find this expansion contraction wing, and that's something we found in the field. So, for example, one of these mounds here starts from the top, from the base, and will grow. We develop one first generation, then potentially with what we think the controls are, and then we start a second generation forming two wings. And we can see here that they seem to be quite flat and widespread, and it doesn't seem to be any influence of trees in that particular example. Something different that I will show you with the next example. And there are some mounds we found with the third wing, the third generation. So we think it was the exact same process. Sediment input increase, but not enough to kill the community associated with a lake level rise or a subsidence increase. And we will create a third generation of mounds, forming these very complex shaped mounds. But they are actually formed of three smaller bun-shaped mounds. And that's something we found in the field. So we can see the third generation here with the first wing, then a second generation, and then this third one that will form. That's something also you can note is that that's something I mapped as well. We can find these three wings at the same level. So if we measure the height or the level from the base of the bed, we always find these wings at 50 centimeters on top of each other. So 50 centimeters, 1 meter, and 1 meter 50. So that gives us an idea that it's something that was widespread, and it's a lake that we can correlate across the web. One of the things I mentioned earlier is that we think here there may be also an influence of the location of a tree. That's why also we will have this very much larger, much bigger mounds because there may be some influence of the tree remains that will go from the tree in situ. But then, yeah, the conclusion of that is that we think that these mounds are controlled by lake level fluctuation and the sediment input into the lake system. So now I will show you very briefly some stable isotope we've done on the sediment. So to note here that we did this measurement not on the mounds to avoid the biological effect. So we only tried to sample the Intermount patches. So the results are here in red and in blue. We've done this measurement, this analysis on 3 quarries across the Isle of Portland. And we measured these 2 beds, the school cap in blue and the art cap in red. And I plotted this our data with most of the published data, all the published data I could find that are also sampling not the thrombolite or the microbial, but the sediment on the lakefront to be able to consider that. So here is most of the fluvial to freshwater lake. And here on top, it will be all the saline and hypersaline conditions. But the first thing we can see, if we look at the data of the Purbeck here, is that the overall value of carbonate and oxygen, carbon and oxygen, comparing with what was published as the general trend by Land in 2004, it looked like it's tend to be more freshwater rather than saline or hypersaline. But we will see that it's not truly freshwater. That's why we think it's a brackish condition. Another thing we can see is that the art cap in red is slightly more negative than the school cap in blue. That indicates that there may be a slight freshening section. The regression coefficient for, if we consider either the 2 beds or all of them, is very low. And that indicates an open lake system according to Talbot 1990 classification on lake system. And then if we look at the carbon signature, we can see that they are contained within the fluvial and freshwater signature, but not truly freshwater. And that could be explained by a depletion in carbon-12 due to photosynthesis or a constant renewing of surface water. You showed earlier that we are in a very shallow system. Or an increase in vegetation and a short time of residence of the water into the lake. And that's something that can backfill this hypothesis of the open lake system. And similarly with the oxygen data, they have the same signature as the saline or hypersaline published data, but not as little bit more, not as negative as they can be. That could be due to a depletion in 016 due to evaporation, but not that much evaporation. And mainly because we think this lake was a freshwater, but not truly freshwater, to brackish water condition within a through flowing system, so within an open system. So everything we see so far helped me to create this fascist model for this lower part of the Purbeck. So that will be applied or applicable to the 3 different beds where we find microbial mounds. So we have the Portland group and the Purbeck separated by nonconformity, in that case, a paleosoil, which is the base of the bed. And then in the deepest part of the lake, we will have this sublittoral lacustrine. I didn't show you much in detail, but it's this very fine grainstone or packstone, waxstone, sorry, fascists that we find in a few locations. And then we will have this mounded marginal lacustrine with this deep expression of the mound that will form microbial mats. And we think that with comparison with analogues that I will show you just after. And then on top of that, the shallow mounds with these very tabular and small mounds we found on the lake, on the shallowest part of the lake, and these more complex mounds develop around the 3 branches or trunks that we found, that I showed you in detail. And then on the lake shore, the development of these paleosoils, of the soils, with the growth of this coniferous tree and some cycadophytes, as I didn't show you in detail, but we find also some cycadophytes silicified. And thanks to that, we could define that we were in a brackish water lacustrine setting and a semi-arid climate. That's not us that defined that. That was defined by Jane Francis when she detailed and defined and described the trees. So now we show you some modern analog, and I will start with the Laguna Bacalar that we used to create these models, but also to integrate that, as I explained to you at the beginning, into the numerical forward modeling. So here is the Laguna Bacalar, that is a freshwater lake in a tropical system located in the Yucatan, in the eastern side of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. In plain line red here, you can see the occurrence of thrombolite mounds, like we can find in the Purbeck, and in the dashed line, more microbial mats that we found on this more on these areas. And here is the first image comparison. Always on top here, you will see the Laguna Bacalar, and at the bottom, I will show you pictures of the Purbeck. So that's what we see. So we went there with the other physician, the Stanislaw. We visited there in March 2015, and where we can see on the lakeshore very, very similar structure and mounds shape and morphologies and sizes that we found in the Purbeck. We can also find these flat-topped mounds that will live at the top of the interface with the air-water interface, and that we consider to be analog of what we found in the school card, these tabular shaped mounds. And I will show you a video, underwater video, with these mounds here that we can compare this image I showed you. You can see here the water depth. We are really very shallow environment. And then we can also find, like when we go a bit deeper, maybe this example of this very bigger mound. I'm a very bad swimmer or diver, so I couldn't go that far deep. But yeah, we find this very similar mound. If we look as well on the hand specimen, a bit more zoom in, here on top is these clots we found in the living microbialite, thrombolite of the Laguna Bacalar, and at the bottom, this in the Purbeck. I show you this image again, very similar. And at the micro scale, here are living microbial filaments, and that's an example of the Purbeck, of the very similar microbial filament traces in that case, preserved in these mounds. So in conclusion, although we have different depositional settings, freshwater lake, tropical condition, I forgot to mention that this is linked with a frost belt. In that case, The Purbeck is a brackish water lake in a semi-arid climate, Mediterranean type, and we are in a coastal. We think we were in a coastal lakes. We found very similar, if not to say the same, internal and external fabrics. And similarly, if we look at another analog, the Great Salt Lake that I went to visit as well in 2014, here again in red, the occurrence of the Micromounts on the lake shore, some location of normal faults that are imaged on seismic line that people NGPR analysis. And also to note here that we have an hypersaline lake. It's a craton lake in the middle of the continent in Utah, and hypersaline. But here I show you again an image, a video of the Great Salt Lake that was shot. That was not by us. That was shot by Michael Vandenberg from the DNR in Utah. And we can find very similar things in the Purbeck. So on the lake shore of the Great Salt Lake, we can find maybe similar shape rounded like that with this hole in the middle. And then the further we go into the basinward direction in the Great Salt Lake, we found more finished mound. We will cover the top and more coalesced. You can see here that they start to be different mound that start to coalesce together. And so the video doesn't go as far as I would like to. Yeah, there we go. But then we can end up, I think, the further we go, the more you end up with similar things we find in the Purbeck. Similarly, with the fascists we found on the shores. So here is some of the microbial intraclasts that have been deposited and accumulated with the wind and the waves on the shore of the lake. And that's something, the Great Salt Lake, and that's something we found as well in the Purbeck. So here in the image of the thin section, where we found this microbial intraclast that can accumulate, maybe not as much great quantity as in the Great Salt Lake, but they can also be ripped off the microbial mounds and transported and deposited not too far from them. And again, at the small scale, within the thrombolites themselves, we can find very similar structure of the microbial, diffuse microbial influence, binding peloids together and or intraclast that we found in the area. So again, although we have very different system, even different than with the Laguna Bacala, Craton Lake hypersaline condition, very hypersaline if you know this lake. The Purbeck again, brackish, Mediterranean type climate, and in a coastal lake, we have very similar internal and external fabric. That will be important for what I will come back in the conclusion in the next few slides. So, as to conclude on the project, I created as well tectono-sedimentary models to take into account the location of the fault, the relay ramp, and all the distribution. So here I showed you the three that I created for the school and hard cap, but I will only detail today the hard cap, just to simplify. What we see here is the traces of the fault, the location of the relay ramp between the two faults that we think was the main freshwater input in the system. And then we can find the sublittoral lacustrine, slightly deeper fascists in the center part of this of the lake, and then the mounded marginal, deep and shallow, where we have this development of microbial mounds and microbial mats. And what we can see from that is that we can see that the microbial mounds develop in the shallowest part of the lake, so close to the fault, and on the Isle of Portland, and most likely with the northeast-southwest trend, a line between the relay ramp and the Isle of Portland that will define a shallowest part of the lake. And you can see here that there will be maybe two sub-lakes within this lake, separated by a natural and topographic barrier. And you will see in the next slide that there may be difference between separation between a more brackish water condition in the west and a more hypersaline condition in the east. That's something that I don't have time much to detail today. We have two main depot centers. So I told you at the beginning with the seismic, when we looked at the whole Purbeck Limestone Group, that there was a depot center next to the Ridgeway Fault. It appears that even within the lowest part of the Purbeck, there was already this depot center there. in the very close in the animal block of the river fault, and aligned with the northeast southwest trend, aligned with the rally ramp and the Isle of Portland. So that's something I told you earlier. I don't have time much to detail, but we used the stratigraphic forward modeling as well to improve that model, that tectonostratigraphic model, and vice versa. We filled the numerical forward model with all the data that were the outcrop, the sedimentary logs, to try to understand what were the facies distribution between the logs where we don't have any outcrop data, because you can see here the coastline here is within Windward Bay, and everything has been eroded down to the lower Jurassic in that case. In terms of discussion on the tectonostratigraphy, to compare what was done in the past, so only two main studies were looking at that. West in 1975, sorry, and Underhill in 2002. Ian West looked at facies trend, and he found this northeast southwest facies trend, but he did not include the fault. So for him, maybe they were not active. For Underhill, he took into account the fault that were in the area. But what was the problem with him was the facies association that he used, because they are based on West. And for example, he modeled a breccia or a conglomerate at the base of this fault, and that's something that nor Ian West nor us in the field has ever seen. So that was purely based on conceptual model from other location of a relay ramp system. And in this study, so we created this summarizing tectonostratigraphic model that you can see that it was with influence from Underhill, where we put the location of the fault that we've done from the seismic interpretation, the facies distribution from all the sedimentology that we've done, and this integration with the forward modeling. This takes into account as well the facies trend that some of the previous author identified as well. And we also include something that was not done before, the distribution of the microbial mounts according to where they are from. And you can also see here what I mentioned earlier, this more brackish water condition to the west and hypersaline condition to the east. And mainly because we think that the freshwater system, the freshwater input was mainly done through the valley ramp and feeding this part of the lake rather than the eastern part of the lake.
Arnaud, can you conclude a little quicker?
That's the conclusion. I will go fast then. We saw that there are three main fabrics: thrombolite, stromatolite, and borrowed limestone in the microbial mounts. That the stromatolite I found on the floor, on the lake floor. The borrowed limestone is found around the trees when they were in living position, and the thrombolite is found where after the tree fell and developing upward. The morphology of the mound tells us that there are two main: tabular, bun shape, and then much more complex, bigger, and that these morphologies are controlled by the water depth and also the location of the trees. That they are also controlled, these morphologies, by lake level fluctuation, and that we will have more complex shape when we have trees. And finally, that one of the main questions that we had, and that remains in microbial mounts analogues, can we use that an analog for another analog as a paleo-environmental indicator? But I showed you that we can have different paleo-environment or depositional settings, and we will have the exact same internal and external structure fabrics. So we don't think it can be a very good indicator for paleo-environmental condition, but it can be a good indicator for depositional settings to look at what are the control of the deposition of this mount. Thank you very much for today again, and I put again my email address here if you want to have any question, and I'll leave you with some images of the field and of some colleagues that helped me during the project. Thank you very much.